Hi, everyone. My name is Niv Ashkenazi, and this is Eye for Technique. Today, we're going to be covering the three most common shifting mistakes, and we're going to have examples in slow motion to help you see clearly what those mistakes are and what a good shift looks like as well. Usually, the goal of a shift is to not be noticed at all. Unless we're trying to have some expression in our shifting, like let's say adding a slide, we don't really want to hear the shift, and if someone wasn't looking at you, ideally they wouldn't even know that you shifted. In order to have a good shift, you have to move your hand all together as one unit, and you want to have the hand frame stay consistent. All three of the common mistakes that we're going to go over today in some way affect the frame of the hand and usually make it collapse in some way. If we collapse our hand while shifting, or if our hand doesn't move all together on a shift, it can cause a lot of problems in our playing. Some of these problems include bad intonation, especially on arrival or a little after arrival. It can also end up shaking our violin to the point that it actually affects the sound because the bow is bouncing off of the string a little bit. And it can make the shifts extremely obvious when we want them to be clean. Now we're going to look at some of these shifting mistakes, and I'm going to have some slow motion examples for you so that as I'm describing it to you, you can see it in full detail. I've spent nearly 30 years trying to perfect my shifts, so to go back and actually purposely do these mistakes was rather difficult, but I did my best to exaggerate the mistakes so that you guys can see it and hopefully recognize if you are doing that in your play. The first common mistake that we're going to cover is squeezing the thumb. Any amount of squeezing can really affect your shift. Usually squeezing the thumb comes from some sort of fear that is around shifting. You might not actually feel that you're afraid, but you might be uncertain about where you're going or some other fear about the process of shifting. Let's talk separately about the two squeezing mistakes that we usually see. And the first one is going to be squeezing so hard that the thumb doesn't move or moves very little and never reaches the same place as the rest of our hand. If you ever find your thumb lagging behind and not arriving ever to where your fingers are after a shift, likely you're squeezing. We can see in the video that the thumb never makes it to the right place, and this will affect your idea of what that position is going to feel like. The thumb is there to help you measure the distance, and so if the thumb is not going the full distance, you're not going to have the right sense of the position that you're in. The second common squeezing mistake is the one that I see even more. And this usually happens when someone already is aware that they tend to squeeze and they feel like they have generally fixed this problem, but they still have a little ways to go. Usually the way this shifting mistake happens is that as we start the shift, there's a bit of a squeeze, then the shift itself is perfect, followed at the end by another squeeze to stop our hand and make sure that we don't overshift. The treacherous part about this mistake is when you look at it, it does look like you did a good shift, but the problem was really the beginning and the end. This type of shifting mistake often means that even if you nail your shift itself, the next couple notes after the shift might end up out of tune because we're already in a more squeezed position with our hand rather than letting our fingers work the way they're supposed to. This is also the version that can really affect our bow and make it bounce or add an extra sound that we just don't want. The next common shifting mistake is leading with the fingers. When we lead with the fingers, the thumb might actually eventually get to where the fingers were, but the fingers will have gotten there well ahead of the thumb. This shifting mistake can look very similar to the problem with squeezing with the thumb, but it's actually coming from a completely different problem. As I talked about at the beginning of the video, a good shift means that the whole hand is moving together. We don't really want any finger or any part of the hand to lead. So if we have our fingers leading before the thumb, even if the thumb catches up, it messes up our hand position, our framing, and can cause a lot of unwanted intonation problems. This common mistake also often creates extra slides that you don't mean to have. Usually this mistake happens from uncertainty of where you're going. So while you are trying to figure out where that note is, you aren't concentrating on your hand position, and you start leading and sliding with the finger to find the note. I find that I see this shifting mistake most commonly with students that haven't had the benefit of studying with a teacher, or that their teacher hasn't had a chance to work with them on shifting that much yet. That being said, many teachers, me included, will tell students to lead with the fingers, the thumb, the wrist, and that is okay. When a teacher is telling you that, that usually means that there's some part of your motion that isn't going together. And what they're trying to do is help you compensate with that particular part of your body that's going to be leading, to make sure that the movement ends up being one solid motion. So if I have a student that is leading with the thumb, where the thumb is going first and then the fingers are moving, I might tell them to lead with their index finger. And that's just to make sure that they're moving everything together and not letting their thumb move ahead. That doesn't mean that I actually think that the finger should lead. That is only to get the person to shift with the whole hand together in one motion. Our final common shifting mistake is scooping with the hand while shifting. Usually we want our hands to be very still while we play and while we shift. Doing a scoop like this can make it really hard to reset your hand. And this is going to be especially true if, let's say, you're shifting to third position, but then soon afterwards you need to get around the bout. This mistake usually leads to intonation issues because your entire hand position when you arrive is different from where you were in the previous position. And it also creates a lot of difficulties in fast passages. This mistake usually comes when we lead from the wrist, which can feel very natural, but again, we don't want any part of our body to lead. We want the whole hand to move together. When the wrist leads, it collapses the hand, which then leads to this scooping and a drop in our knuckles. This mistake often happens because when you scoop in this way, it almost feels more like you're doing a shift. So especially if you're really concentrating on your shifts and you're trying to get them in tune and you want to exaggerate and feel the motion, a lot of the time this is where this mistake will begin to get ingrained as a habit into your play. Those are the three most common mistakes, but let's talk for a quick second on some advice on how to fix this. One of the best ways to fix your shifting is making sure that you're fully aware of what mistakes you might be doing. So looking in a mirror, recording yourself on camera, those are ways that you can help yourself spot those things. The violin is already hard to play. If we're moving around a lot, we make it that much harder. Shifting gets us around the violin, but we want to do it with the least amount of motion possible so that we can consistently stay in tune and have a systematic way of getting around the instrument. If you see any extra motion in your hands, especially while shifting, most likely it is some form of one of these three common mistakes. What I always tell my students is try to play with a quiet hand, a hand that stays the same in every position and gets there in one fluid motion. Depending on the level of your playing, these shifting mistakes might be extremely obvious, but they also might be very subtle. Getting them truly perfect will always raise the level of your playing. Even if at the moment they're just subtle mistakes in your playing, in order to get yourself to that next level, if you truly commit to having a perfect shift every single time, that will up your playing. Even though these are the three most common mistakes, there might be some other shifting mistakes that you're dealing with. So if there are any, please leave them down in the comments and maybe I can do a video covering them in the future.